The massive cruise ship Ocean Star cut through the Caribbean waters on its maiden voyage. With a capacity for 5,000 passengers, the luxurious ocean liner was the pride of the Royal Caribbean Company. Infinity Edge pools, glittering casinos, gourmet restaurants, and suites fit for kings delighted the tourists on board. Among the passengers was Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old freelance photographer who had won the trip in a contest. From the first day, something seemed out of place to Sarah. In the photos she took of the ship and passengers, a strange shadow appeared frequently. At first, she thought it was just a camera defect. On the third night of the trip, Sarah woke up startled at 3 a.m. She had the distinct feeling that someone was watching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw a dark silhouette standing at the foot of her bed. She screamed and turned on the bedside lamp, but there was no one there. Trembling, she called the reception. The staff said they would send security to check, but no one showed up. The next morning, Sarah tried to convince herself that it had all been a nightmare. She decided to go to the spa to relax. On the way, she crossed paths with an elderly lady in the corridor. The woman seemed agitated and grabbed Sarah's arm. "You've seen him too, haven't you? The Shadow Man," the lady whispered. "He's everywhere, but no one believes me." Sarah felt a chill. Before she could respond, a couple approached and took the lady away, apologizing. "Our grandmother suffers from dementia. Don't mind what she says," they explained. Disturbed, Sarah decided to investigate. On the ship's social media, she found reports from other passengers about visions and strange presences. Many attributed it to vivid imagination fueled by excess cocktails. But Sarah knew there was more to it. That afternoon, she went to the upper deck to photograph the sunset. When checking the photos, her blood froze. In one of them, the silhouette of a tall, thin man dressed in an old sailor's uniform was clearly visible. But Sarah was absolutely certain that there was no one around when she took the picture. With trembling hands, she showed the image to a passing waiter. The man turned pale. "My God, it's him, Captain Anderson!" The waiter whispered that Captain John Anderson had commanded the company's first ship 50 years earlier. On his last voyage, the ship sank under mysterious circumstances. Only the captain was never found. Rumors said he had made a pact with dark forces to stay alive, condemned to wander the seas eternally. But that's just a silly legend to scare the newbies, the waiter laughed nervously. "Forget what I said, miss." That night, Sarah could barely sleep. Shadows danced on the walls of her cabin. Whispers echoed through the corridor. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed she was on an old ship in the midst of a terrible storm. A man with a face covered in seaweed held the helm, laughing maniacally. Sarah woke up screaming. The clock showed 3:33 a.m. The air in her cabin was freezing. On the foggy bathroom mirror, words had been written. "Welcome aboard, Sarah." Terrified, she ran out of the cabin. The corridors were strangely deserted. Sarah ran to the deck, desperate for fresh air. That's when she saw it. Dozens of people walking in line towards the edge of the ship. Their eyes were glazed over, as if in a trance. Sarah screamed, trying to alert them, but her voice wouldn't come out. An invisible force pushed her, making her join the macabre line. The more she resisted, the weaker she felt. Tears streamed down her face as she was dragged to the edge. Suddenly, sirens began to blare. Lights came on all over the ship. People ran around confused, awakening from the trance. Sarah fell to her knees, exhausted. Crew officers appeared from all sides, trying to calm the passengers. The captain made an announcement informing that the ship had suffered an electrical failure, causing problems in the navigation systems. They would have to return to the nearest port for repairs. Sarah knew that was a lie to calm things down. Something much more sinister had happened. In the days that followed until their return, Sarah noticed frightened looks exchanged between passengers. No one spoke openly about the incident, as if they feared that doing so might invoke it again. When they finally disembarked, Sarah vowed she would never set foot on a ship again. Her mysterious photos had disappeared from her phone. There was no proof of what had happened, only the terrifying memories that would haunt her forever. Weeks later, Sarah received an email from the cruise company. It was an invitation for a new trip, completely free, as an apology for the inconvenience. Attached to the email was a photo. In it, Sarah saw herself on the ship's deck. Behind her, smiling sinisterly, was the man in the old uniform. In the corner of the photo, a message was visible. "Your passage to eternity awaits you, Sarah. One cannot escape the call of the sea." Sarah deleted the email with trembling hands. That night, the sound of breaking waves echoed in her nightmares. Captain Anderson was waiting for her, and she knew that one day she would have to return to the sea to face her destiny. The Oasis of Dreams was the largest cruise ship ever built, a floating colossus with 18 decks and capacity for 8,000 passengers. On its maiden voyage through the Mediterranean, the ship was a spectacle of luxury and technology. But for Chief Engineer Michael Reeves, each day aboard was a nightmare. Michael knew a terrible secret. The ship had been built in a hurry, with cost-cutting in critical areas. The water purification system in particular was a ticking time bomb. He had warned the company executives, but was ignored. "Profits first," they said. "Fix what you can and keep your mouth shut." On the 5th day of the voyage, the problems began. Passengers reported a strange coloration in the shower water. The taste of water in restaurants was different. Michael worked frantically in the ship's hold, trying to contain the impending disaster. That's when the first death occurred. A 70-year-old lady found lifeless in her bathtub. The autopsy revealed a fulminant infection by an unknown bacterium. The case was hushed up, attributed to natural causes. But Michael knew the truth. The bacterium was in the water, and it was spreading. In the following days, more passengers fell ill. The ship's infirmary became overcrowded. Strange symptoms manifested: high fever, delirium, bluish spots on the skin. The captain considered returning to the nearest port, but company executives, via satellite, ordered the voyage to continue. "It's just a flu outbreak," they insisted. Michael couldn't take it anymore. He decided to tell the truth to the passengers. But when he tried to access the ship's communication system, he discovered that his access code had been blocked. He was trapped in a conspiracy bigger than he had imagined. Desperate, Michael turned to Emma, an investigative journalist who was on board doing a story about the ship. Together, they began collecting evidence and testimonies from sick passengers. But the crew had received strict orders. Anyone who spoke about the contamination would be immediately put in quarantine, actually locked in the ship's hold. As more people fell ill, panic began to spread. Entire families showed symptoms. Children cried with terrible pains. The doctors on board were perplexed. They had never seen anything like it. Michael and Emma discovered the terrible truth. The contaminated water wasn't just in the ship's systems. It had infected the very ocean around them. The Oasis of Dreams was leaving a trail of death wherever it went. On a stormy night, they managed to break into the communications room. Emma broadcast a live video exposing the entire situation. The world watched in horror at the scenes of chaos and suffering on board. But it was too late. The infection had spread to 70% of passengers and crew. The symptoms worsened by the hour. People were delirious, their skin taking on a sickly blue-green hue. Some swore they saw tentacled creatures emerging from sinks and drains. The authorities ordered the ship to be placed in absolute quarantine. No one could leave for fear of spreading the contamination. Helicopters dropped supplies, but there was no known cure for that mysterious infection. The Oasis of Dreams became a ghost ship, wandering aimlessly through the Mediterranean. Warships surrounded it, ensuring no one escaped. On board, chaos reigned. People maddened by fever and pain roamed the corridors. Some threw themselves into the sea, preferring death to suffering. Michael and Emma, still healthy, tried to maintain order and care for the sick. But each day, more people succumbed. Bodies were thrown into the sea, as there was no more space in the makeshift morgues. In their feverish delirium, the infected spoke of an ancient presence awakened in the depths of the ocean, an entity that had waited millennia to avenge humanity for polluting its domains. The ship was just the beginning of its retribution. On the 15th day of quarantine, satellites detected a massive anomaly moving in the depths, following the ship's trail. Scientists speculated about a toxic algal bloom of unprecedented proportions. But those aboard the Oasis of Dreams knew it was something much worse. As the sun set on the horizon, tinting the sea red, giant tentacles emerged from the waves. The collective scream of terror from the passengers was heard miles away. The ship's last transmission showed Michael and Emma embracing, facing the Lovecraftian creature that rose before them. "May God have mercy on our souls," were Emma's last words before the transmission was cut off. The oasis of dreams disappeared that night, swallowed by the depths along with its thousands of passengers and crew. The search lasted months, but no debris was ever found. In the years that followed, reports of missing ships and mysterious oceanic diseases multiplied. Marine biologists noticed strange mutations in deep-sea creatures. It was as if something had fundamentally altered the very nature of the oceans. The tragedy of the Oasis of Dreams became an urban legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human comprehension. But for those who knew the truth, it was the harbinger of something much worse to come. Meanwhile, on beaches around the world, seawater occasionally took on a strange blue-green glow, and those who looked closely might swear they saw, for an instant, tentacular shapes moving in the waves, waiting for the right moment to emerge and reclaim the surface. The ocean's revenge was just beginning. The Eternal Memory was a one-of-a-kind cruise ship. Designed to offer an authentic retro experience, the ship was a perfect replica of the luxury ocean liners of the 1920s. From the Art Deco lounges to the mandatory period costumes for passengers, every detail was meticulously recreated to transport guests back to the Jazz Age. Among the passengers was Eleanor Winters, a historian specializing in the interwar period. For her, this voyage was more than just a cruise. It was a golden opportunity for her research. In the first few days, Eleanor was enchanted. The glamorous parties, live music, card games, and smoky lounges, everything seemed to have come straight out of an F. Scott Fitzgerald novel. But on the fourth night of the voyage, something strange happened. Eleanor woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of distant music. Curious, she left her cabin and followed the melody through the deserted corridors. The music led her to the grand ballroom, which should have been empty at that hour. As she opened the doors, Eleanor was dumbfounded. The ballroom was full of people dancing, but they weren't the other cruise passengers. They were ethereal figures, almost transparent, dressed in clothes from an era even older than the 1920s. The music came from a ghostly band on stage. Stunned, Eleanor retreated and ran back to her cabin. She convinced herself that it was all just a vivid dream, probably influenced by her enthusiasm for the era. The next morning during breakfast, Eleanor overheard other passengers commenting on visions and strange sounds during the night. The ship's captain quickly intervened, attributing everything to excess champagne and the cruise's immersive atmosphere. Intrigued, Eleanor decided to investigate. In the days that followed, she discreetly interviewed other passengers and crew members. Many reported similar experiences, visions of people from other eras, objects moving on their own, voices whispering in empty rooms. In her research in the ship's library, Eleanor made a shocking discovery. The Eternal Memory wasn't just a replica. It had been built with materials salvaged from various historical ships, including some that had sunk with great loss of life. The situation became even more sinister when Eleanor met Olivia, a medium who was on board disguised as an ordinary passenger. Olivia confirmed Eleanor's worst fears. The ship was infested with spirits, lost souls from past maritime tragedies. "They're trapped here," Olivia explained in a whisper, drawn to familiar objects, reliving their last moments repeatedly, and now they want company. That night, a terrible storm hit the ship. As giant waves lashed the hull, the supernatural manifestations reached their peak. Passengers screamed as they saw spectral figures emerging from the walls. The sound of twisting metal echoed through the corridors, as if the ship were being torn in half. Eleanor and Olivia ran to the bridge, determined to alert the captain. But when they got there, they found a nightmare scenario. The captain and officers were in a trance, guiding the ship directly into a giant whirlpool that had formed in the middle of the ocean. Desperate, they tried to take control of the ship, but it was too late. The Eternal Memory was swallowed by the supernatural vortex, dragging everyone on board into the depths. Eleanor woke up startled in her cabin. The sun was shining through the porthole. Had it all been a nightmare? Relieved, she got up and opened the door, only to find herself facing an empty, dusty corridor. In the mirror across the hallway, her reflection showed an aged face, as if decades had passed. It was then that the terrible truth hit her. The eternal memory had become part of its own myth. Trapped in a temporal limbo, the ship was condemned to sail eternally between dimensions, carrying the souls of its passengers on an endless journey. Every night, the cycle repeated itself. The passengers relived the fateful voyage, forgetting by morning only to experience the horror again at nightfall. Eleanor was the only one who remembered, condemned to watch helplessly as the souls around her were tormented repeatedly. Years passed in the outside world. The disappearance of the eternal memory became one of the great maritime mysteries of the 21st century. Search expeditions were conducted, conspiracy theories flourished, but no one ever discovered the truth. Meanwhile, somewhere between the mists of time and the waves of the ocean, the eternal memory continued its ghostly journey. Eleanor, now part of the spectral crew, watched from the bow as new ships occasionally crossed their path. She knew it was only a matter of time before another ship was drawn into their cursed orbit, bringing new souls to join the eternal dance of the damned. And so the cycle would continue, echoing through the ages, a grim reminder of the secrets and horrors that the sea holds in its unfathomable depths.